Welcome everybody! This is a fast counter-attack. Boca takes the lead. Lost it.
Welcome to the first episode of the Golimetry podcast. My name is PFN Monahan. This is a series of audio documentaries all about the Copa Libertadores, South America's top club football contest. Next week, to coincide with the next video release, the audio documentary will be about the dazzling, incredible footballer Alberto Spencer. He was one of football's greatest ever strikers. He's comparable in skill to Pelé, although they are both different players. Pelé was more of a playmaker and an attacking midfielder, and Spencer was more of a poacher. Spencer is, though, immortal, and he is known and celebrated not just in his native Ecuador, not just in Uruguay, where he played much of his career, but all across the continent. Netting 54 goals in the Copa Libertadores, Spencer is, to this very day, the contest's all-time highest goal scorer. This week, though, I just want to talk about the Copa Libertadores. I want to explain what it is and what makes it so awesome. I'll break down the features and why each aspect makes it excellent to follow. This will be a two-part episode, with the first part released this week and the second released Friday next week. Across most of the world, winning the UEFA Champions League is the pinnacle of club footballing achievement. Players move to top-flight clubs just to reach the goal of a Champions League title.
Lionel Messi now running at the heart of the defence, plays in a lovely ball for Neymar!
Among millions, the Champions League is the apex of football.
Robert Messi player has surely won the UEFA Champions League with just over a minute remaining at Wembley.
But in South America, the Copa Libertadores is the best club football competition of all.
The Copa Libertadores, the most important clubs competition in South America.
The Copa Libertadores is also known as the CONMEBOL Libertadores. CONMEBOL is the South American version of UEFA. It is the confederation responsible for South American football. So I'll use the terms Copa Libertadores and CONMEBOL Libertadores interchangeably. So, just as the UEFA Champions League is the top-flight club competition for European sides, the Copa Libertadores is the top-flight club competition for South American sides. Yet, in the English-speaking world, in most of Europe and across Asia, where European clubs have massive numbers of dedicated fans, the Copa Libertadores is not widely followed. But it should be. And I want to explain why. Because the whole philosophy behind Golimetry is based on showing the world why the Copa Libertadores is amazing and why it is worthwhile paying attention to.
This trophy, the Copa Libertadores, the most traditional trophy, the most important one in the continent.
South Americans, whether players, managers, staff, officials or supporters, regard the Copa Libertadores as the most prestigious club football competition in the world. The exemplary midfielder, Deco, was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil. He's among the most privileged and talented few to have won the UEFA Champions League twice with two different teams. First with Porto in 2004 and 2 years later with Barcelona.
Deco gets it back, he's been outstanding. And he's made it 2-0.
Near the end of his career, he articulated a viewpoint which is common in South America. Winning the Copa Libertadores would be the best thing that could happen to me in my career. He even said he would exchange both his UEFA Champions League titles for a single CONMEBOL Libertadores triumph. From a player with such an esteemed worldwide reputation, who gained most glory in Europe, Deco's statements show how important the Copa Libertadores is to South Americans.
This is as good as it gets.
Neymar Jr. made similar remarks when he was still playing in Brazil. In 2010, as a hot prospect and a target for European scouts, the youngster refused to move from South America, specifically from Brazilian club Santos, until he'd won a Copa Libertadores title. He wouldn't transfer at that time, in spite of massive offers from a range of different European clubs. "I want to stay until after the tournament," said Neymar at that time. "We cannot stop here. We have to go in search of the Copa Libertadores." Neymar won the contest in 2011 with Santos. This episode is not about South America versus Europe. This isn't about better or worse. The Champions League and the Copa Libertadores are different tournaments, and I think it's futile to say that one is better than the other, because what does that actually mean? For me at least, both competitions are fantastic and both have differences. But to examine and understand the Copa Libertadores, it can help to make some comparisons and ask some questions. What makes the Libertadores different? What makes it unique? What makes it special? In my view, it's hard to overstate how mind-blowing the Copa Libertadores is. The atmosphere has typically been one of the biggest differences between the CONMEBOL Libertadores and the UEFA Champions League. It is important to note initially that the coronavirus has muted the atmosphere a lot for the current 2021 edition of the Copa, but the games are still great. The flair, the excitement and the passion are not gone. They're still seen at each match, and still seen, heard and felt on the streets and in the homes of South Americans, and in the hearts of all the players and the fans, wherever those fans might be watching from. And the atmosphere will return in a huge and explosive way once the pandemic is dealt with in whatever form that takes. Before the coronavirus though, the noise at matches was incredible, at times drowning out commentary with chants, songs, usually referred to as himnos or hymns or anthems in Spanish, and crowd cheers reverberating throughout the grounds. During the reception, when teams move onto the pitch, mosaics of noise, songs, lights and colour have blasted through the stadiums. Fans would hold flares, and smoke from these often settled onto the grounds. Sometimes the smoke has been so residual that games must begin in a haze and players have had to manoeuvre through the settling vapours. Crazy fan behaviour has been reasonably common and to a point tolerated, unlike in the larger European competitions.
Ron Vanderlei is asking to his fans, to his supporters, to calm down. Let's hope they listen to him.
You'll see in past matches, and after fans are allowed back, some unusual and incredible stuff from the groups of hinchadas or fanatics in the crowd. Like what? Like fans climbing up cages that surround the stands in some stadiums. During entire games, people climb up and down the mesh wire on every side of the pitch, letting off fireworks, screaming and singing or shaking the cages. You'll see fans doing anything they can to ruin other teams' chances, whether that's pepper spraying opposition players, which has happened.
Some River Plate players have been sprayed with gas as they were coming out.
Or flying drones over the pitch, drones carrying messages that taunt the other team and the other team's supporters. You might see dogs running onto the pitches and players removing them. You might see players needing bottled oxygen due to the thin air at high altitude stadiums. You might see home clubs shutting down the lights in the stadium when they're losing important matches. In some ways, the pre-pandemic Copa Libertadores crowd atmosphere was a throwback, or at least in some ways like the football atmosphere of Europe in the 1980s, but with a South American touch and perhaps more of an extravaganza. A true spectacle, surprising, unruly and fanatical. And it'll return in full force.
You also have some spectators on the field now.
It can be chaotic, but it is not all chaos. The Cup has an air of mysticism about it, provided by the fans and the players' love for the game and love for their teams, as well as the fierce desire to win the exalted trophy. At La Bombonera, home of the Buenos Aires club Boca Juniors, the roar from the crowd has been deafening.
There's an extraordinary atmosphere at La Bombonera. The fans never stop singing.
Supporters would shout and jump and celebrate so intensely that the stands actually swayed, and the swaying caused the pitch itself to quiver, an imposing if not terrifying effect. One player, the luminary Hernan Crespo, played for River Plate, Boca's arch rival. Crespo described what happened when he first came to play against Boca at La Bombonera at just 18 years old. I was on the pitch, and when they say La Bombonera trembles, it is true. I was there, and I thought it was my legs that were shaking. Then I saw the confetti on the ground moving up and down, and I realized it was the crowd jumping, which caused the stadium to vibrate. It's very tough. It is not easy to play at that ground. When Boca Juniors and River Plate face off, these two clubs, perhaps the two most well-known in Argentina, play what's called the Superclásico, a merciless derby known across the world. It is taken to another level when these teams play each other in the Copa Libertadores. In 2018, the two clubs did play each other, and in the final, no less.
The most wonderful duel of Argentinian teams that you can get.
Called by some in the media, the final to end all finals. The teams faced off in the first leg at La Bombonera, but the second leg, due to an attack on the Boca team bus, was played in Europe, at Real Madrid's Bernabeu.
For the first time in the history, a CONMEBOL tournament is decided in Europe.
I've got a video made before the 2018 final, intended to show how fierce the Superclásico could be. It's on the Golimetry YouTube channel, and I'll link to it in the description of this episode. The Superclásico is not the only ferocious South American derby, but one of thousands. Indeed, last year's Copa Libertadores, the 2020 edition, ended with a derby final between two São Paulo clubs, Santos and Palmeiras, with the latter side getting the win.
Oh, Breno! What a ball!
If you're interested, check the Golimetry website for an article detailing the road to the 2020 finals. Again, this will be in a link in the episode description.
Palmeiras champions of the 2020 Copa Libertadores on the 100th minute goal.
The Copa Libertadores is part of the culture of South America. Teams pour their effort into winning it. Fans from across the continent regard a Copa Libertadores title win, just as most players do, as the utmost achievement in club football. Games ignite zealous excitement as they're played in some of football's most hallowed grounds, from El Monumental in Buenos Aires, home of River Plate, to Rio's Maracanã, the largest stadium in Brazil, home of 2019 champions Flamengo, and a stadium which has housed as many as 200,000 spectators. In South America, when a team enters the tournament, it is described as a dream. Teams who get knocked out of the tournament have awoken from the dream. Winning the CONMEBOL Libertadores is an event like no other in club football, but in fact the Libertadores itself is like no other contest in the world. The madness, the intensity, the clamour, the spectacle, the history, they all combine when the Copa begins. And even in the absence of crowds, the atmosphere isn't gone. It has perhaps just condensed or distilled more onto the pitch and into the game itself. The next factor that makes the Copa Libertadores special is the unpredictability. Let's again turn to Deco's comments on the tournament. In the Libertadores, there are more teams that are able to win the tournament, but in the Champions League, it is always the same few big teams who contend for the title. Copa Libertadores football is at its core volatile, impossible to predict. Any team can win, from the minnows to the bigger clubs. The Champions League can be unpredictable, and we see upsets in the group stages and even in the knockout rounds. But because big teams spend so much money assembling the best array of players, managers and tactics, the multi-billion-dollar clubs are broadly dominant in the European Championship. The history of the CONMEBOL Libertadores shows upsets all the way through, and upsets are common to this day.
Well, a shock result there. Barcelona victors over the mighty Santos. The finalists in last season's Copa Lib have started with 0 points.
With the earliest games at the start of the year, the Copa Libertadores runs throughout the year in the same way that most South American domestic football leagues do. Teams travel vast distances, often covering as many as tens of thousands of kilometers, 6,000 miles or more, back and forth during even one brief Copa Libertadores campaign. The group stages then are particularly difficult for teams that are geographically distant, and South America is a huge continent with teams distributed very long distances away from one another. So these aspects, that is, the structure of South American leagues and the endurances of travel, contribute to the uncertainty of match outcomes. The huge amount of time spent travelling can make a campaign stressful, but that's not the only factor. Another key factor teams face is that they must play in climates and geographies that are vastly different from one game to the next. From some of the world's wettest areas, like in parts of Colombia where the rain never really stops, to the driest, like in Chile's Atacama Desert, a place so arid NASA has used it to model Martian terrains. They meet from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from sea level to stadiums perched kilometers high. The effects of travel and climate are more distinct in the modern game than in the Copa's early days, simply because as the tournament grew from its inception in 1960, more teams were added and so more travel has been required. Consecutive title runs have occurred in the Copa Libertadores, especially in the competition's first 25 years or so. Title holders, though, up until 1999, qualified automatically to the knockout rounds of the next tournament, skipping the group stages altogether, giving them a significant advantage. In the modern incarnation, where title holders just qualified to the group stages of the next tournament, only once has a team defended the title. Boca Juniors, who won in 2000, retained the cup in 2001. But in the contest's last 20 editions, no team has won consecutively. 14 different teams have won over the last 20 years, including remarkable upsets and astonishing wins from smaller clubs like San Lorenzo of Argentina and Liga de Quito from Ecuador. In the Champions League, in the last 20 seasons, 9 teams have won, and only 3 teams have not won consecutively. That's Porto, Manchester United, and Inter Milan. Real Madrid won 5 cup titles in that time, including 3 in a row, and Barcelona won 4 titles. All 9 winning sides have been large, well-funded, financially viable teams with incomes comparable to multinational corporations. In fact, the net worth of each of these title winners is at least in the hundreds of millions, and typically in the billions. So a quick comparison between the two contests over the last 20 years shows how big clubs have dominated the UEFA Champions League, yet in the CONMEBOL Libertadores, a greater number of clubs have won, and clubs with smaller incomes and far less economic power have managed to earn eternal glory through title wins, which adds up to a much less predictable football competition.
This is the Libertadores, and anything can happen in the first 90 minutes or more.
And so, the Copa Libertadores offers a wonderful treat. Any team can win any year. In no year is the cup winner a foregone conclusion. Hence, you can watch and not know which side will emerge as dominant. In the next episode, I'll talk about how the Copa Libertadores allows youngsters with great potential and developing talent a space to shine. I'll discuss the tactics and styles of the Copa Libertadores, and I'll briefly go over the format. Check the podcast description for the schedule link and the other links I've mentioned. Whether through video, audio, text, or multimedia articles, and using a range of interactive content, Golimetry is the best way to step into South America's premier club football competition, the Copa Libertadores.